The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to the Weird Tales Radio Show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome. I'm Charles Christian, and you're listening to another episode of the Weird Tales Radio Show. With me is Janie, who'll be joining me shortly to talk about folklore. And I'd just like to flag that our big topic in this episode is going to be an interview with the writer Nik Perring, who has got some handy tips and trips on how to write a credible real-life story when you've had a paranormal experience. You've probably all encountered this thing where you pick up a book and it says, it's about a man who's encountered a ghost or had a poltergeist in his home or encountered UFOs, but it's so badly written that you just lose interest, and by page 2 you're thinking to yourselves, I don't care if you were abducted by aliens. Anyway, Nick's got some definitely good advice for you, all meat, no filler. And I say, he's coming up after Janie. And here's Janie, who's going to talk to us about some of the myths, legends, urban myths, folklore associated with the annual time change. When the clocks go back.
Well, it is kind of a date related event.
It is
indeed. Apparently only about a third of the world join in this craziness, in my view. But as you know, I have strange views. But it's all about maximising daylight waking hours, as in fall back in winter and spring forward in spring. You can remember what happens. Anyway, yes, now there is some thought that Benjamin Franklin originated the idea of moving clocks forward, but no. Apparently, by the time he was about 78, and an American envoy in Paris, which was 1784, he was espousing the virtues of early to bed and early to rise. But he wasn't practising what he preached. Because apparently, after being unpleasantly stirred from sleep at 6 a.m. by the summer sun, the founding father penned a satirical essay in which he calculated that Parisians, simply by waking up at dawn, could save the modern-day equivalent of $200 million through the economy of using sunshine instead of candles.
Right.
Yeah. But what they would have done with all that tallow and wax if they weren't using candles, I don't know. Removing hair from hairy ladies' legs, perhaps. Anyway, yes. As a result of the essay, apparently Franklin is often erroneously, as I hinted at earlier, given the honour of inventing daylight saving time, but he only proposed a change in sleep schedules, not the time itself.
Right.
You see?
Right, gotcha.
Yeah. Although it did occur to me now when I was reading about that, he was stirred from sleep at 6 a.m. 3:30 a.m. is when I wake up. So if I'm tetchy today, you'll know why.
Yes.
I don't know what it is. It's something like melatonin or something. I don't do well with this changing clocks, as you know. It takes me about 6 months to adjust. So I'm thinking, come spring, I'm not going to change back.
Good idea.
I'm just going to stay on my own time and just see how the rest of the world
fits in with
Janie
time.
With me. Yep.
Yeah.
They can or they don't. I don't mind. No. You see, no. It was an Englishman.
Hooray!
Yeah, we come up with some good stuff sometimes.
We do.
William Willett, who was a builder by profession, actually. But, they're quite clever. They're very clever, actually, often. Anyway, he did lead the first campaign to implement daylight saving time. He lived most of his life in Chislehurst in Kent. Mm-hmm. Not far from where I used to live.
Ooh.
Of no interest to anybody, I realise. And apparently he was riding his horse in Petts Wood, near his home, one summer morning, and noticed how many blinds were still down. And this idea of daylight saving occurred to him. And apparently, to add a bit of veracity, there's still a daylight inn at Petts Wood. I don't know if that's part of a chain. Anyway, Willett believed that the United Kingdom should move its clocks forward by 80 minutes between April and October, so more people could enjoy the plentiful sunlight. What kind of era was he living in? It was plentiful sunlight in April. I mean, yeah, anyway. So he campaigned vigorously. Mm-hmm. And by 1908, he'd managed to gain the support of a member of Parliament.
Hooray, hooray.
Called Robert Pearce. And he made several unsuccessful attempts to get it passed into law because the British Parliament stymied the measure. And poor old William Willett, he died in 1915 at the age of 58 without ever seeing his idea come to fruition. Oh. Now, here's a little aside information, Jim. Mm-hmm. Willett is the great-great-grandfather of Coldplay singer Chris Martin, who had a top 10 hit in 2003 with the single called Clocks.
Oh.
That's extraordinary,
spooky.
Isn't it? Yeah. So, yes, it gets even more bizarre because Germany was actually the first country to enact daylight saving time, and it took World War I for Willett's dream to come true, because on the 30th of April 1916, Germany embraced daylight saving to conserve electricity. And Willett, of course, may have been horrified to learn that Britain's wartime enemy followed his recommendations before his homeland. But weeks later, the United Kingdom followed suit and introduced summertime.
Hooray.
That's not the song, by the way.
No.
Okay. Anyway, for decades, daylight saving in the United States was, it's most bizarre, a confounding patchwork of local practices. It's because states and localities could start and end daylight saving whenever they pleased. And it was a system the Time magazine, rather aptly named source, described in 1963 as a chaos of clocks. In 1965, there were 23 different pairs of start and end dates in Iowa alone. You couldn't make it up, could you? And St. Paul, Minnesota, even began daylight saving 2 weeks before its twin city, Minneapolis. So, passengers on a 35-mile bus ride from Steubenville, Ohio, to Moundsville, West Virginia, passed through 7 time changes, apparently. However, order was finally brought to bear in 1966 with the enactment of the Uniform Time Act. And that standardised daylight saving time from the last Sunday in April to the last Sunday in October. Mm-hmm. Although states had the option of remaining on standard time year-round. And Hawaii and Arizona, with the exception of the state's Navajo Nation, do not observe daylight saving time, the little rebels. Now,
yes,
there's more, because, as you know, I'm very health conscious.
You are indeed.
Not to say slightly hypochondriac.
Yes.
Anyway, I did know about this, so I had to look into this. DST,
yes,
daylight saving time, has mixed effects on health. In societies, it's reckoned, with fixed work schedules, it provides more afternoon sunlight for outdoor exercise, which of course is good. It alters sunlight exposure. Although, of course, it would depend where you are, whether that's beneficial or not. But it's generally beneficial because sunlight triggers vitamin D synthesis in the skin. And, of course, may help in depression by causing people to rise earlier. But some argue the reverse, actually. So, clock shifts, this is the interesting part, were found to increase the risk of heart attack by 10%. Now, you may not know this, but the reason for that is extraordinary, is that we've completely underestimated the benefits of sleep for our general health.
Oh, right.
And losing just an hour a day, or a night, as it were, can actually make you more susceptible to illness, including heart attacks, etc., like that. Yeah. So I don't hold out much hope for me, waking up at 3:30. Just thought I'd mention that again. Quite a few hours lost there. It, obviously, it reduces people's efficiency, but, the people will actually have more road accidents. And the effects of the adaptation to the new circadian rhythm can be quite severe and last quite some weeks, which is why I'm considering my slightly bizarre
Janie
idea.
o'clock.
Janie o'clock
will be the rule for the future.
My time.
My time.
So the trouble is, I'll never remember what time it is, will I?
No, you
'Cause,
won't. No, you won't. No.
But
Oh, yes.
there is an unexpected adverse effect of daylight saving time in the fact that the extra part of the morning rush hour that traffic occurs in, it's like before dawn,
Yes.
what I'm trying to say, causes higher air pollution than if it was released during daylight hours. I mean, it's something to do with atmospherics. Well, and as I mentioned, obviously accidents increase by a certain amount. They reckon about 11% during the 2 weeks that follow the end of British summertime. In 2017, so quite recently, researchers at the University of Washington and University of Virginia reported also that judges who experienced sleep deprivation as a result of DST tended to issue longer sentences.
Ooh.
So if you ever feel
Yes.
yourself in clink and your
Up before
brief
the beep.
says,
Yeah.
try and sort of organise it for just before clocks go back or forward.
Yes.
Just a little tip there.
That's a very useful little tip, yes. And for those of you listening in the United States, should also mention that the UK's clock change is certainly in the autumn, a week earlier than in the United States. So we have a strange thing that all the times are 1 hour different, 1 hour shorter. America is 1 hour closer to us just for that 1 week.
Confusing?
Very confusing.
I think so.
Thank you, Janie. We'll be back to you again shortly.
Something wicked this way comes. Weird Harvest Press presents Harvest Hymns, the sweet fruits and twisted roots of folk horror. A 2-volume set of books investigating the music of folk horror, featuring contributions from some of the biggest names in the field. Candia McCormack, Johnny Trunk, Maddie Pryor, Sharon Krause, Jim Jupp and Kemper Norton, to name just a few. Available now via lulu.com. 100% of all Weird Harvest Press profits are donated to wildlife charities.
Welcome, fool. You have come of your own free will to the appointed place. It is time to keep your appointment with the Wicker Man. The Wicker Man.
Right, I'm speaking to Nik Perring, a writer
Great.
and a long-time virtual friend of mine, but one of those, as is the way of the world. I live at one end of the country and he lives at the other. We've never actually met in person. But that's the modern world we live in. Now,
we haven't yet.
No. Now, before we go into any further, tell us what you actually do besides your fiction writing.
Okay, I am primarily, as you say, a writer. I'm mostly a writer of short fiction. I've published 5 books now, one for children, for grown-ups. But alongside that, I also teach writing, and I've been doing that since 2005 or 6. I can't quite remember. It's that long ago. And I've taught across all institutions, primary schools. I'm a writer in residence at a couple of high schools, one in Leeds and one in Scunthorpe for story. I've taught at the BBC a few times. I've taught at library unis. So yeah, that's it's a strange balance, but it's a really, really nice one.
Now, one of the reasons I want to talk to you today is we get a lot of people send in books or links to ebooks about their paranormal experiences, encounters with UFOs, living in haunted houses, encountering poltergeists and things. And one of the things that lets them down is, frankly, the quality of the writing, the general pitch of it. They don't grab you. You frankly don't care whether the aliens abduct them or not, because you're just not relating to them. And it seems to be a lot of people out there are doing themselves a disservice. They're rushing down, getting it into print, but they're not actually asking, what is the reader going to think about it? How can I make this something that the readers will say, wow, I want to read, I want to learn more, I want to go past page 1. What are the sort of basic tips and tricks for that kind of thing?
I think, I'll start off by saying I am hugely, hugely interested in UFOs and ghost stories and all that kind of, be them real or fiction. I'm just rewatching the X-Files after doing a whole Twilight Zone, all the series of those. And they interest me, because I think it's a very interesting subject. I think in terms of kind of practical advice, the one thing that I encounter the most, the biggest kind of obstacle that I find when I teach writers, is that primarily when they start writing, they try and sound like a writer. And that's the worst possible thing you can do, I think, because all that happens is you end up sounding like somebody trying to sound like a writer. And that can be confusing, because what you're doing is you're letting the words get in the way of the story. Right. I think in terms of story, it's story that needs to come first. We all know how to tell stories. I've said this hundreds and thousands of times. If something happens at work or in the playground or something like that, or in a haunted house, you'll say, you talk to, I don't know, your wife, your husband, your dog, whoever it is you talk to, you'll say, dog, this happened. And then this happened as a consequence. This happened, and then it finished. And that is story structure. So I think what people need to do as a kind of first port of call is to look at not overcomplicating things, and just tell us in your own words, talk through your pen or through your keyboard in a similar way that you would tell somebody.
What you when you say they try to sound like writers, they start using an artificial language which they think is bookish. Rather than colloquial as you'd actually speak. Exactly.
And, any good writing, I think, should be accessible on a basic level. And especially if we're talking about stories that have happened to people, there's no need to dress it up with overcomplicated sentences or really long words and things like that. It's the story, because by the very nature, if somebody's interested in ghosts, a ghost story, a real life encounter, is going to be interesting simply by the virtue of it having happened. Mm-hmm. So I would always suggest, keep it as simple as you can and get to the point. I think a lot of people also try and do, which is a mistake, but I still do it now in my writing. I've been a professional writer for, 14 years or something now. And I think, excuse me, a lot of people feel they have to write themselves into the story, even if it's recounting something. Start at the interesting bit. You don't need to give us a load of background particularly. I mean, a little bit of foreshadowing can help you if it's in a haunted house. Tell us the history of the house, by all means. But what I'd be interested in as a reader or as a listener is what's happened to you. So don't waste any time, your time, and don't waste any of your words getting to the exciting bit. Start as close to the end as you can.
Yeah, start with a bang, yes, rather than. Do you think it's because some people feel that they've got to make the book long? You know, I mean, many of these things are self-published ebooks, and so length really isn't an issue. It's not like you're having a paperback where there are a hardback where there are demands on them, on word counts and things. It just seems that there's an awful lot of padding, and you read some of them and you think, well, that whole chapter could go because it does nothing, and we don't care what you said to the mailman when he came the next day.
Exactly. The other thing when we talk about something longer is it doesn't have to be long to be good, and especially like you say with ebooks, it's not like it's going to fail some sort of test if it's not X number of thousand words long. And what I would say to anybody writing anything is let the story come first, and it will be as long as it is. Mm-hmm. Take out everything, and I think this is the trick that a lot of amateur writers, with all due respect to them, that's not a negative thing. It's a trap that they fall into, is that they kind of the editing side of it, because what I do with my stories when I teach writing is say get the first draft down. That's the most important part of the whole process, because then you've got something to work on, and once you've got something to work on, the trick is kind of being bold enough and brave enough to take stuff out, because sometimes you don't need, like you say, you don't need to talk about the mailman or what you said to him the day after. So take out everything you don't need. Take out everything that isn't absolutely essential to the story. Yeah, it will make your story shorter or your book shorter, but it'll make it a lot better. It'll make it a lot cleaner. It'll make it, the rhythm will be improved by it, because it'll be slicker, and we're only dealing with the cogent points. We're only dealing with the bits that are interesting. And I think the other thing to think is, how would I feel as a writer reading my own work? Would this bore me? And I think most people that I've worked with on any level, when they're writing, they'll think, God, this is a bit boring, I need to get through it. If you're feeling that it's boring whilst you're writing it, it's going to be boring, I imagine, for anybody who's going to read it. Yeah. So I think the trick is to be bold with it. And don't be afraid of cutting things.
That does seem to be a failing of a lot of, and as you say, we're not using the term in a pejorative sense, but a lot of amateur writers, that they're so keen to get it out there, they don't put it through a decent editing process. I've always felt, put the manuscript away for a few days or longer, and then reread it once the excitement of getting it all down on paper is done, and sort of in the cold light of day, if you like. And
no, I think it's a really interesting point, because I think what happens is when you write something at the first draft, you are excited by it, and that's the exciting bit, because you can see progress and you're getting your words down onto the computer or onto the page, and that's exciting. And then you finish it and it's like, my work's done. This next bit going through it isn't as exciting as creating something, because it isn't. Yeah. But it is essential if you want it to be fit for consumption outside of your office or your kitchen or wherever it is you write it. I mean, what I do, my editing process is quite rigorous. I'm quite and I stuck to it for a long time. I'll write longhand if it's a shorter piece, and then I will type it up. And when you type it up, you get a really efficient half edit, because you'll notice things that you want to change. And you've got the opportunity to do it because you're there typing it up. Yeah. But what I do after that is I'll print it out and do the obvious editing stuff where you cross words out, or you add bits that that are going to make it better, hopefully. And I do that until I'm happy that it's done, and then I print it out again and I read it aloud. Yeah. And when you read it aloud, you see what you've actually written rather than what you think you've written, which is really, really useful. And you might find yourself stumbling over words. And I've always said, if you stumble over them when you're reading them, somebody will stumble over them when they're reading them in their head. But what is also useful to do, and I know a lot of people don't have time to do it, and it's a little bit more difficult with something longer, but I will record myself reading it, and I'll take myself off, put my iPod, should I say, my Walkman as it is now, in my ears, and listen to it back. And once you're doing that, even if you're just doing the reading of it, when you get to a point where you think, this is a bit boring, I can't wait to get to the next bit, that's the bit, the time where you should be thinking, right, this can go.
Yeah. Another point I notice is that people tend to bring in their personal grudges almost into it. Obviously, if you're talking about some scary encounter, then your personal feelings are relevant, but they seem to then start having a grumble about life, the world generally, and people not understanding them. And the phrase I've seen it used in a sporting context is loser's limp, and you sort of have this chip on your shoulder, and and again the voice that's coming across, the voice of the author, because typically if it's a true life story, that is the dominant voice, the author's voice, is unsympathetic, and you're sort of thinking, grow up, or was that necessary? And I've read one, and he starts making some rude comments about his ex-girlfriend. You think, well, hang on, she lived with you for 2 years in a haunted house and had all sorts of stuff, and she finally couldn't stick it because you wouldn't leave, because you didn't want to lose the rent or something, and she you're slagging her off, you got her into this mess, and you could have got it out of her, and you just sort of lose sympathy with them.
I do. I think there's two things to say on that. I think number one, if you're writing a story or a book about your experiences with ghosts or
poltergeist,
might be, the people reading that are interested in your experience with ghosts and poltergeists and all that kind of stuff. They're not particularly interested in your personal life, I don't think.
Yeah.
If I read a book on somebody's experience with poltergeist, I'd love to know how it affected you or your partner or your family, but your own personal feelings towards her, should I say, I don't think are relevant. And I also think when we read anything, be it fiction or non-fiction, as we're talking about here, what we need to do as readers is have some sort of empathy for the characters we're reading about. If that character is you, I want to be behind you. I want to be backing you. I want to be sympathetic towards you. If you're coming across as moaning and all that kind of stuff, I lose that. I don't root for you quite as much. And I think that's because we see ourselves in books. We like to put ourselves, how would I feel in that situation if a poltergeist was scratching me in sleep or throwing things around the house. And I think that way of doing that is, showing us who you are, because that's an interesting part of it, but only the relevant bits.
Yes, I mean, I think that is the magic word you said there, is empathy. I mean, it's to do with all books, fiction as well, and indeed movies and other forms. Yeah. If you don't actually root for the character, you don't care about them, and you don't engage, and you're going to abandon the book halfway through. It's that classic, if you don't care whether the character lives or dies, then it's lost.
So it was, you don't want to get into a situation where the reader ends up not liking you and hoping that you can sticky end and think, you know what, he bloody deserved that.
Yeah. Another element is, obviously, you're dealing with this kind of topic. You're dealing with something that is verging on the fantastical. You've got to keep an element of credibility there. Although you're telling a story that people are going to be, their jaws will drop, they're going to be incredulous about. What? You saw aliens, you saw a flying saucer, you saw this ghost. People will have their natural sort of doubts about it. But again, how do you, as the author, add credibility to it so people don't think you just made it all up or you're basically some kind of nutter? And again, I've read some of them and you think, you just sound like care in the community here.
Excuse me. I think what's important is honesty. And I know when something strange happens to us, we want to believe, and that can be dangerous sometimes, because we look for reasons to justify what we're saying. So I think an element of, I wouldn't say scientific, because we're not all scientists, but something where we're not accepting this 100%. Give us the facts. And I think, again, it's developing empathy and sympathy. Of you saying, maybe it was this. I looked into this, and no, it couldn't possibly have been that. Or then we looked into this, and it couldn't possibly be that either. So, as far as I'm concerned, to the best of my knowledge, it was a UFO, or it was a ghost or a poltergeist, or what have you. And I think if you're questioning it legitimately, because we will when we read it, you might think, oh no, it wasn't a ghost. It was the male. He was wearing a hood. It was cold. Yeah, and he walked by your window and he cast a strange silhouette against a streetlight or something. So I think an element of always be honest, because we like that. We buy into honesty. We will have empathy if we think you're being honest, and not also, but without being apologetic for it either. I think at the moment, and I've read this as well, in my time, people say, you're not going to believe this. I know you'll find this hard to believe. Yes, that's good to a point, but don't over-egg that pudding, because we will start to doubt you if you're doubting yourself. So it's about getting a balance between honesty, I think, integrity, and looking at it in a questioning way. And not accepting literally everything. In a haunted house, there may be 2 or 3 things that happen over the course of a night or a week or something, one of which may be kind of almost a refutal, that actually happened. The other thing might have just been the creaking pipes, the heating might be a bit dicky. So having that honesty and bringing it to the table and saying, what do you think, reader? Because you're as involved in the whole process as I am. Now you're reading the book. It's a collaboration. It's almost like a silent discussion. So putting it to the reader and trusting them to make their own minds up, not preaching or not lecturing them, I think is really, really important as well, because we're intelligent, we're human beings, we are, by nature of being human, intelligent living things. We are capable of coming to our own conclusions on stuff, and it will always be more effective if the reader feels that they have come to that conclusion themselves from the evidence that you've given or the stories that you told them. That kind of, the buy-in from a reader is really, really important.
Yes. Yeah. No, those are brilliant points. You're right on the button with that. You sum up and I say you encapsulate my thoughts on that when I read some of these things, and I think, well, you're just not convincing me, and you're almost hectoring me if I don't believe you, and you're not willing to address my skepticism. You're either for me or you're against me. You're not allowing anybody to have their doubts, which you can persuade them to reconsider.
Yeah, those doubts are legitimate. Not everybody. The thing is, when we're writing stories, especially about stuff that's happened to us, we think almost that people are on board already because it's happened to us. Obviously, they'll feel the same. They don't appreciate a lot of the time that a reader's coming to this cold. Yes. They may never have had that experience. So there is a bit of persuasion and a bit of convincing needs to happen, and a little bit of respect to the reader as well. And again, it's about developing empathy and being honest with people, and hopefully getting to buy in and be interested in it. And as I say, anybody picking a book up like that, I would imagine most of the time has an interest in it. So, otherwise, they wouldn't be picking it up. So you have kind of got them on side to start off with.
They're partly sympathetic towards you anyway, so don't go and alienate them by implying that they must be stupid or something if they don't believe you.
Exactly.
Any other tips or advice you might give people if they were setting down saying, I had this really weird experience, I want to tell the world about it?
I think be happy and be confident that is what the world, or a large part of the world, wants to hear. There's definitely an audience for it. We love that. Going back thousands and thousands of years, we've loved the idea of talking about or sharing our stories about aliens or ghosts or anything like that, which is what I'm really, really interested in. You know, you go back and you see the Nazca lines in Peru and inscriptions on temples all over the prehistoric world. It's been there for a long time. But I think if you want to get your story across, think about how they used to do it back then. It was all oral storytelling. It would be somebody telling a story with a voice to a bunch of people. Do that through your work. Do that. As I said before, talk through your pen or talk through your keyboard. Present us with the story. It is interesting by virtue of it happening. And don't try and overcomplicate it. Don't try and sound like a writer. And don't be scared either of your words. Like I said before, we are all intelligent because we're human. You know, we're all able to tell a story, and we do that naturally when we have a conversation with somebody without thinking about the structure of it or you know how to put this sentence together or that sentence together. Don't worry too much about that. It'll come naturally because we know what we're doing. So don't be kind of scared of putting things down. Also, don't try too hard to sound like an author because, like I said before, you will just sound like somebody trying to sound like an author. So share us your story. We've got ears. You know, we're all a huge part. A number of us will want to hear that kind of story because we're interested in it. But just don't include anything we don't need either. And revise.
Yes, your first draft is not your final draft. Your first draft is just your first draft, and there's a lot more to come.
I hope it's sorry, Brad. If it's not, I'm sorry to it was who said it. But he said the first draft was you telling yourself the story. And I love that because it is. The second draft is, like I was saying before, that's you make it fit for human consumption outside of your kitchen or your living room or wherever it is. You've written it, so keep an eye on audience with that second draft and think, is this going to bore them, or do I need to put more in to keep them more excited? You know,
one of the bits of advice I heard, which was specifically towards giving talks and lectures, was the tone you should take would be as if you were talking to a friend in a pub and you were explaining the story to them. You wouldn't talk down to them. You wouldn't assume they were an idiot, but you talk in a certain way and you'd communicate that way. And that's really what you're saying with a non-fiction real-life event. You're doing the same thing. As you say, the first version of draft is for you. The second version is for you out there, and to engage with them and to keep them from getting bored and wandering off. Just as if you were in a pub and you were boring someone silly with some tale, they'd head off. Oh, look, is that the time? I've got to go.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think, treat people with it as if they have intelligence, because they do have intelligence, as I've said a few times now. And also, I mean, the other thing to remember is it isn't easy writing a book. The fact that you're doing it, huge credit to you. That it's a difficult thing to do, and it takes a lot of commitment, and that's not underappreciated. But I think putting the effort into the bits that need the effort is the difficult bit to identify sometimes. And as I say, when you write your first draft, I know people that don't worry about spellings when they're writing it. They just want to get the story down, which is the most important thing. Then they go back and tidy it up. And just think, if I was reading this book myself and I didn't know me, would I like it? Or what else would I like? Or what bits wouldn't I like? And you can be quite... You want to be as objective as you can with it. I think what I would always say is you can probably cut out more than you think. And it's terrifying to do it at the time because, you think, I've invested time in this. I put these words down. It was effort. It was energy going into this. I don't want to lose them. What part of the craft of writing is taking stuff away to make it better. There's a great analogy somebody came up with, a sculptor. They're talking about, how do you carve a bird out of a block of wood? And the sculptor just turned around and said, I just take out everything that isn't bird. And I think we have to look at writing like that. There are always bits you can take out. And once you do, it's quite interesting. take him out. You don't have to. You can save like a copy of a draft, can't you? You can have 2 or 3 different versions of it. But if you take it out and then you go back and you reread it, you will notice that it's slicker. You will notice that it fits together better. And that's what we want to do. We want page turners for the right reasons, not because you want to get away from a boring bit. We want to get a page turner because people are interested. So if keeping the interesting bits in, it's more likely to be interesting.
That's brilliant. Any final bits of advice you've got?
No, I think the most important thing is people do want to hear your stories. I certainly do. So don't be scared of telling them. But also, tell them in the most natural way you can. Don't be kind of frightened by the prospect of buying a book or of getting it wrong. I think that's what a lot of people kind of have over them. Like I say, just tell us your story in your words, because they're the important bits, because you're the one that's experienced it. And good luck to you.
Yes. Right, that's brilliant, Nick. For people who want to find out more about you, you've got a website, haven't you?
I do. My website is nikperring.com without the C. And if anyone wants to drop me a line, they can do through that website.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. And what are you working on next in terms of your own writing?
On my own writing, I'm not allowed to say. I'm going through the process. I'm just about to finish the second draft of something, so I should keep you updated.
Okay, Nick, thanks again. Been brilliant talking to you.
You too, thanks for having me on. All the best.
You are listening to the Weird Tales Radio Show with Charles Christian on internet radio and podcast.
And now here's Janie again, and we're looking at some notable dates in the folklore calendar.
Yes, because 11th of November, obviously, very recently, just passed, is St. Martin's Day, which I expect
Nobody knew.
everybody knew. Nobody knew. No, I expect nobody knew, including me, until I checked into it. So I expect you'd like to know who St. Martin was.
Yes.
Yeah, he was Martin of Tours, or Tours. That's not cycling tours.
Tours.
No, it's the
Coach
city.
tours.
Yes, in France.
Uh-huh.
He was circa 316 to 397. That's obviously AD.
Yes.
Yeah. Can't work out how old he was. But anyway, he was a soldier in the Roman army, and he decided to convert to Christianity, and he was imprisoned for his refusal to fight, actually. Then he became a monk. Then he founded the first monastery in Gaul. Then he became Bishop of Tours in 372. It's very hard to kind of say these dates, isn't it? And he served there till he died.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had a great reputation for miracles.
All good.
Yeah, before and after his death, and it made him obviously extremely popular in France and neighbouring countries, including Britain. This is Middle Ages, obviously, and but word got around, you see, and there's a lot of churches dedicated to him.
Good.
You've noticed. Anyway, the main aspect.
I went to a school called St. Martin's.
Oh, really? And of course, St. Martin's, the art University College School in London. Very,
St. Martin's
very famous.
Lane, yes.
Yeah. Yes, there's a lot of them around, isn't there? Yeah. That's the interesting thing, that you just accept them, but you never really link them to, how did they come about?
Yeah.
Anyway, the main aspect of the day in this traditional year, as it were, is, in fact, there's little connection with the saint, really, but an awful lot to do with its position in the farming calendar, because Martinmas was traditionally the time when animals were killed to prepare for the coming winter months. So that's the way it was, without freezers, obviously, and ways to preserve things. And they were all a lot healthier for it, I think. Well, apart from getting the plague and things. But so they'd slaughter all the animals because of obvious reasons, they couldn't store them or And of course, save feeding them through the winter months, and people needed the food. And it became such a widespread activity that November was called Blood Month in the Anglo-Saxon calendar. And there's supposedly a vague superstition that until recent times, in Ireland at least, that something should be killed on this day for luck. But obviously not the luck of the thing that was killed. Yeah. And then the meat was salted or dried, and it even had a name. Martinmas beef was a common term for meat treated in this way. And because it was one of the last opportunities of the year to eat fresh meat. And also then many byproducts of the killed animal, like black puddings and offal, would be made. And so you won't be surprised. There was a bit of a reputation for merrymaking.
Oh.
I liked merrymaking.
They did indeed.
Don't hear so much of merrymaking now.
No, you don't. No, it's all gloom these days.
Yeah.
No merrymaking at all.
No. And anyway, so St. Martin's Day then took the place of Michaelmas as a settling day, sometimes, not always, in some parts of the country, but particularly up north, because it was the day that rents were due.
Right.
So annual terms of employment,
Yep.
occupancy, in their little
Yes.
hovels, was all sort of turnabout, and a lot of house moving took place. Yeah. So that was quite fun. And it was also a time when people would eat roast goose. I don't know why.
No.
I don't. How do they know? Anyway, a useful piece of advice was included by Richard Inwards in his collection of weather lore. If the wind is in the southwest at Martinmas, it keeps there till after Candlemas, which is the 2nd of February.
Oh, good. So that's a good Martinmas day means a nice winter.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, except, of course, our winters are about 7 months long, so that just takes us into the first third. Yeah. There's another funny little tale about St. Martin's. Fenny Poppers.
All right.
Yes. You don't hear that often, do you? Fenny Poppers. I don't think anybody has ever heard of Fenny Poppers, but what it is, Fenny Stratford Parish Church in St. Martin's in Buckinghamshire was... sorry, it's not in St. Martin's. It's called St. Martin's, and it's in Fenny Stratford.
Yeah.
Let's get this all right.
Right.
In Buckinghamshire. Was built by somebody called Brown Willis. Mm-hmm. And he was learned, but he was eccentric.
Oh.
And a local squire, and we liked them.
We do.
Because they're usually completely mad as a box of frogs, aren't they?
Yes.
And get up to all sorts and just don't care. Anyway, in 1724, in memory of his grandfather, Dr. Thomas Willis, who had lived in St. Martin's Lane, London, as we just referred to, he died on St. Martin's Day in 1675. Willis himself died in 1760, and he left money for an annual sermon in his name. And it is also assumed, but it can't be proved, that the Fenny Poppers that are still fired today, every St. Martin's Day, are part of this bequest. So what are these
Fenny Poppers?
Fenny Poppers, you are wondering?
Yes.
That are fired in the memory of his grandfather. Oh, dear. Well, they're 6 small cast iron cannons, and they're loaded with gunpowder. It's starting to sound a bit more fun, isn't it? And fired with the aid of a long iron rod with a red-hot tip. Mm-hmm. And the result is 6 deafening bangs in quick succession at 12 noon, 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. And they used to be fired in the churchyard, but concern for the church's fabric prompted to move to nearby recreation ground.
That sounds a lot of fun.
Yeah, the present poppers, I think they do a little bit more than pop, but anyway, were cast in 1859 because the originals were becoming dangerous. A few people had a bit of backfiring, the recoil was a bit
I think
serious.
cast iron has a danger of exploding.
Yes, yeah. That wasn't so fun.
No.
And they're sometimes fired on other special occasions, such as the death of Queen Victoria. and the beginning of a new millennium. So they don't get a lot of work.
No, they don't.
No. And that's all really I have to say about St Martin's, but you are now fully informed.
That's brilliant. Well, I've got one other little bit of calendar folklore, and this is for the 9th of November. And this is called In Carlisle, although confusingly in some parts of Cumberland and Westmoreland they have exactly the same tradition, but they have it on the Friday following Ash Wednesday in the spring. But anyway, to Carlisle, and it is called Pulley Lug Day, as in pull ears. And this is this idea that there's a thing called lawless hours where old folklore says you can get away with mischief that normally you'd get arrested or hit for. And the idea is it's Merrymaking Day in Carlisle on the 9th of November. And
Merrymaking, you say? Merrymaking?
No, mayor, as in the town mayor.
Oh, making a mayor.
Yes.
Oh, right, okay.
Yes, that you basically can, while the ceremony is going on, you can run around pulling people's ears. And there's a phrase saying, "I have a recollection." This is from 1878, so it's quite an old one. "I have a recollection of one day the school scholars coming up to me one day and exclaiming, 'Pully Lug Day,' and forthwith proceeded to pull my ears."
What
and on
coves? Yes.
note, not
stunned
really much
silence.
more to say, is there?
No.
Thank you very much, Janie.
You're welcome. Don't pull my ears.
Well, the clock's against us. Almost time for us to go. But before we do, and obviously we hope to be with you again next time, here's a bit of story that's quite... it's a bit obscure, but it's topical because this is obviously pumpkin season, what with Thanksgiving and also with Halloween just gone. And it's a story about a man in York, that's York in England, called Tom Piercy, and he has paddled a boat down the River Ouse, that's the local river. The actual boat was made out of a pumpkin. He hollowed it out, climbed inside, and paddled his way down the river. The pumpkin weighed 619 kilograms, which, according to my calculations, is 97 stone, or getting on for 2/3 of a ton. And this came as a surprise. There is apparently currently no recognised world record for pumpkin boats. This may be because he's possibly the first person in the world ever to have dreamt up the idea of a pumpkin boat. However, his employers, York Mays, have applied to the Guinness Book of Records to have that boat trip and his boat put in their records. So there we are. Pumpkin boats are a thing. Watch out for them in 2019. And that's it. May your gods and goddesses protect you from ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties and things that go bump in the night. Good night.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, magic, and folklore. Keep in touch with us online at www.urbanfantasist.com or by email at urbanfantasist.icloud.com or on Twitter at Christian Uncut. Good night. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show.